Hi, I'm MICHAELJOSH, your gadget matchmaker, helping you find the right device to match your needs. If you're a follower of this channel, you know I love to talk about new Apple products, and I just can't wait to get my hands on the upcoming M2-powered MacBook Air. Probably the most exciting news to come out of this year's Worldwide Developers Conference. I got some brief hands-on time with the device in Cupertino earlier this month, and I've posted my first impressions video on the channel. You can click up here to watch that. But what many folks might not know is that Apple also announced a second Mac laptop, also powered by M2, the 13-inch MacBook Pro. And we have that machine with us today. So let's take a look. Because there are many different MacBook Pro models, let's first take a look at how this new 13-inch MacBook Pro stands in Apple's current MacBook Pro lineup. Think of this model as an entry-level MacBook Pro. It sits alongside the 14-inch MacBook Pro and the 16-inch MacBook Pro, which Apple unveiled late last year. The 13 and 14-inch models are of a roughly similar size, but the 14-inch has a larger screen thanks to thinner bezels. In some ways, you could think of the 13-inch MacBook Pro as what the iPhone SE is to the rest of the iPhone lineup. It sports an older design, but comes with new hardware and a lower price. We'll break down the differences of all of these models later on in this video, but TLDR, the reason why Apple is keeping this model alive is choice. The 13-inch model starts at $1299, the 14-inch MacBook Pro starts at $1999, and the 16-inch MacBook Pro, $2499. So if you want to go Pro but don't want to break the bank, this here is your more affordable option. Alright, we might have gotten ahead of ourselves, so before we move on to our review, let's start with a quick unboxing. Our MacBook Pros shipped in this brown box, but obviously if you pick one up from the store, it might not have this outside layer. You know the drill by now, just look for the arrow and rip to break the seal. Inside here is the actual 13-inch MacBook Pro box. Up front, there's a white box with a photo of the laptop. And with that wrapper out of the way, you can now lift up this lid. Inside is the new 13-inch MacBook Pro wrapped in some environment-friendly paper instead of plastic. We'll check it out in a bit. Also in the box are a USB-C to USB-C cable, there's a packet with some paperwork, and 2 space gray stickers. And underneath, a 67-watt adapter. Alright, with all of that out of the way, we can now peel off this wrapper and take a closer look at the 13-inch MacBook Pro. Last year, when Apple unveiled the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros, they came with a major redesign. Chamfered edges were traded in for softer, rounded ones. 4 feet lifted the laptop up from surfaces and provided more airflow for cooling. Inside, the keyboard was black on black with full-sized function keys. And the display got slimmer bezels, more real estate, and a notch. Now, unlike those models though, the new 13-inch MacBook Pro sports the same design as its predecessor from 2020. What does this mean? Well, to start, the chassis is pretty much similar to unibody MacBook Pros from the last 5 years or so. The keyboard looks like this. There's still a touch bar up top instead of physical function keys. There's no notch, but it's got thicker bezels. Having used the new redesigned 14-inch MacBook Pro for about half a year now, I really don't want to go back, but that's not to say that there's anything wrong with the old design. In fact, it truly is a work of art, and one that has stood the test of time. Many years later, and it's still a center. I actually even like its keyboard better, particularly being able to see the aluminum frame in between the individual keys. Also, if you're a fan of the touch bar, this is the last remaining Mac that has one. Like all MacBook Pros, it's available only in either space gray or silver. While its outsides might look the same, on the inside, the new 13-inch MacBook Pro is more powerful than ever. The transition from Intel to Apple Silicon was a huge jump for the Mac in terms of performance. Apple's M1 chip was and is groundbreaking, and without getting too technical, picture this. My first M1 machine was an entry-level MacBook Air. a $1,000 machine that ran circles around my $6,000 top-spec Intel-based 16-inch MacBook Pro. The new MacBook Pro runs the even newer M2 chip, which offers even more power and better efficiency. M2 can handle even heavier workloads much better. It also supports up to 24 gigabytes of unified memory, with 8 gigabytes being the starting config. Apple is promising nearly 40% faster video editing performance versus the M1 MacBook Pro. But of course, most likely you're not going to be upgrading from an M1 MacBook Pro, but instead an older Intel model, and Apple says you can expect it up to a 6 times performance boost. To showcase that, we exported a 10-minute 4K GadgetMatch video on a 2019 Intel-based 13-inch MacBook Pro, as well as on the new 2022 model. Clearly, from these results, you can see how much of a performance improvement the M2 chip delivers. But perhaps even more impressive is how much more power efficient Apple's silicon is. Apple is promising about 20 hours of battery life, and in our tests, we were getting close to that. And while that number might differ depending on your usage, what's more important to note is how much or how little power is actually required to be able to perform high-resource tasks. Compared to a 12-core PC laptop, you're getting about 75% less power consumption. A simpler way to illustrate this is by taking a look at the bundled power adapter of the 13-inch MacBook Air. This 67-watt power brick is all that's needed for the Mac to run at full performance. Meanwhile, here's the massive 180-watt power brick that comes with the new Asus ZenBook Pro 14 Duo that runs off the latest Intel i9 chip. The size of these power bricks illustrate how much more power is needed by the Windows machine, and how much power is consumed when you're on battery. Online, the question I'm being asked the most is, since both 2022 MacBook Air and 13-inch MacBook Pros have M2 chips, which one should I get? Well, let's take a look at what differentiates the two. The M2 MacBook Air starts at just under $1,200. The 13-inch MacBook Pro starts at just $1 under $1,300. And while specs are nearly identical, apart from a larger battery on the Pro, which Apple says delivers 2 more hours of battery life, what sets the MacBook Pro apart and gives it its performance edge are its built-in fans. The MacBook Air doesn't have fans. Now, fans come in handy when it comes to sustained workloads. Now, what does this mean? Well, say you're exporting a video and it's taking about 30 minutes. Over time, pushing the machine to its limits generates heat, and heat will kind of take a toll on performance. This is where the fans come in. Fans will kick in once it starts to get hot, so your computer doesn't get too hot and it can perform at max capacity. That, in its essence, is the case for the MacBook Pro. That said, the MacBook Air also comes with its pros, the most obvious being portability. Its updated design makes it feel more current. It has a bigger, better screen with more colors, curved corners, and slimmer bezels, and a 1080p FaceTime camera. The new MacBook Air also now has MagSafe, which, apart from the safety aspect of it, if someone trips on your cord, it doesn't take the laptop down with it. There are other benefits, like fast charging and the freeing up of that precious second USB-C port. Sans MagSafe, when the 13-inch MacBook Pro is plugged in, it effectively only has one free USB-C port. All of this for $100 less. So, is the 13-inch MacBook Pro your gadget match? If you're the kind of user who needs the Pro model but doesn't want to spend a lot of money, then this is the device for you. Also, if you've been holding off from upgrading to Apple Silicon and wanted to wait for Gen 2, now is finally that time. With an educational discount, you can get a new M2-powered 13-inch MacBook Pro for $1199. That said, I am of the belief that the upcoming M2-powered MacBook Air is a better value and is a Mac that most people should buy. Even if, caveat, I have not reviewed one yet. So maybe you should wait for its release later next month. Pro users needing more power need not worry. The M1 Pro and M1 Max powered 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros from last year are still more powerful computers. Get them if you need even more performance power, more USB-C ports, and more connectivity options overall. The 13-inch MacBook Pro will be available in stores starting June 24th, and here's what pricing is like in the rest of the world. And that was our unboxing and review of the new 2022 13-inch MacBook Pro powered by Apple's new M2 chip. What do you think about this laptop? Are you team MacBook Pro or team MacBook Air? Let me know in the comments section down below. We'll be working on a review of the MacBook Air once it's released. Make sure you're subscribed to this YouTube channel so you don't miss it, and hit that bell icon so that you get notified as soon as we upload. Follow me on social media for all the behind-the-scenes fun stuff, and as always, make GadgetMatch.com your daily habit. Until the next video, I'm Michael Josh. Thanks for dropping by.